You think the hardest part of being a mechanic is fixing a blown engine? No, it's looking a fully grown adult in the eye and explaining that their car is not bleeding. Today we're getting into 31 of the dumbest complaints ever brought into auto repair shops. Not mechanical failures, not manufacturer defects, just moments where people were unbelievably confident and unbelievably wrong. Somebody poured in the wrong fluid and asked for a warranty claim. Somebody was absolutely sure their car had been hacked. Somebody looked at physics and said, "Yeah, that doesn't seem right." And trust me, the last story is going to make you question humanity. We're starting with one person who thought they were saving money. Story 1. Pouring windshield washer fluid into the engine. This guy wanted to save money and ended up creating the most expensive problem of the week. He decided to change the fluid in his car himself, opened the hood, saw two caps that looked kind of similar, and with truly admirable confidence, just picked one. No manual, no checking, just pure faith. 10 minutes later, he had poured an entire container of windshield washer fluid into the engine, closed everything back up, like he had just completed a major mission. The car ran for a few minutes, then started making noises like it was submitting its resignation. And here's the best part. He drove straight to the garage, walked in looking deeply annoyed, and said, "My car suddenly broke down after I added fluid. This has to be a design flaw. You need to fix it for free." The mechanic opened the hood, looked at it, then looked at him, like he was seriously considering a career change. He wasn't wrong. He was just wrong in every possible way. But at least, he knew what he had done. Unlike the next person. Story 2. A sweet potato in the exhaust pipe. It's not every day a mechanic finds cooking ingredients. This man pulled into the garage with a very serious expression, saying his car had suddenly died in the middle of the road and that it was definitely a major mechanical failure. He crossed his arms, let out a sigh, then added, "My car is still pretty new. If anything's broken, it has to be the manufacturer's fault." The mechanic checked it quickly and found nothing wrong with the engine. But when they crouched down, behind the car, they paused for a second. There was something brown and round stuck inside the exhaust pipe. Something that looked very familiar. They grabbed a tool and pulled it out. A sweet potato. Nobody said anything for a few seconds. The man just stood there too, like he was trying to remember why there was a sweet potato in his car. "Oh, maybe I was trying something," he said quietly. The car wasn't clogged. Dinner was. But the next person didn't even remember, causing the problem. Story 3. A rotten burrito and demanding the garage take responsibility. This customer walked into the garage with the energy of someone about to file a lawsuit. She insisted that there was a decaying animal carcass inside her car, and somehow, that was the garage's fault. She demanded a full inspection of the ventilation system and even suggested that someone must have put something in the car while it was being serviced. While she waited, she sat in the customer area shaking her head now and then sighing dramatically and saying things like, "I really don't understand how a professional place lets something like this happen. The mechanics took things apart, checked every corner, and spent nearly half the day on it." Finally, they opened the glove compartment. Inside was a burrito that had been past its prime for a very long time. They set it on the table. Nobody said anything for a few seconds. She looked at it, then said, "Yeah, but you guys should have known it was mine. There was no conspiracy. Just a forgotten breakfast." And the next person didn't even know how their car worked. Story 4. An electric car with a stolen engine. This guy called the police because he was absolutely convinced someone had stolen his car's engine. Not in a casual "maybe that's what happened" way. This was full unshakable belief, like the laws of physics themselves. That morning he opened the hood, looked at the wide open space in the front, and immediately concluded, "That's it. The engine is gone." He stood right there in the driveway, hands on his hips, calling in what he described as an organized theft, emphasizing that the car was still very new and that an engine doesn't just disappear on its own. When the car was towed to the garage, he stepped out with an extremely serious expression and said, "I need you to confirm it. Someone took it." The mechanic opened the hood, looked inside, then looked at him. There was a long silence, the kind where you know an uncomfortable truth is about to arrive. "Sir, this is an electric car." He stood there for a few seconds, processing the information like a system update. Nobody took anything. The knowledge just wasn't installed. But the next person thought their car had been hacked. Story 5. shoving glasses into the CD slot and demanding a warranty claim. This guy was convinced his car was destroying an expensive pair of glasses. He walked into the garage with the energy of someone absolutely expecting compensation, set his scratched-up glasses on the counter, and said, "My car ruined these. I need this covered under warranty." He explained very confidently that every time he drove, his glasses came out a little more scratched. No accident, no dropping them. In his mind, there was only one possible explanation: a design flaw from the manufacturer. The mechanic nodded, doing his best to keep a straight face, then gently asked, "Where do you usually keep your glasses when you're driving?" He answered immediately without even thinking, "In the safest spot. I put them in that little slot up front. They fit perfectly." There was a pause that lasted just long enough. The mechanic walked out to the car and leaned down toward the dashboard and found the glasses sitting neatly inside the CD slot like a music disc. It wasn't bad design, just a bad decision. And some decisions get a lot more dangerous than that. Story 6. 3 floor mats blocking the brake and demanding brake repairs. This woman was convinced her braking system had completely failed. She walked into the garage looking panicked, saying the car could barely stop and that this had to be a very serious mechanical issue. "I just had the brakes replaced. There's no way they could already be bad again." She described the feeling of pressing the brake and the car responding slowly, which only made her more certain that something major was wrong. The mechanic nodded, pulled the car in for inspection, and got ready for what sounded like a complicated repair job. 2 minutes later, he came back out, wearing an expression that was very hard to describe. He leaned down into the pedal area and pulled them out one by one. 1 mat, 2 mats, 3 floor mats stacked on top of each other, pressed right up against the brake pedal. She stood there for a few seconds like her brain was installing new information. The brakes were perfectly fine. They were just being blocked by her. The brakes weren't broken. The situation was. But the next person was afraid of something that didn't even exist. Story 7. The GPS was a hack. This customer was convinced his car was being tracked. He walked into the garage speaking in a whisper, but with total confidence, like he was revealing a national secret. "My car is talking to me, and I don't think that's normal." He explained that every time he drove, some strange woman's voice kept telling him to turn left, turn right, and somehow she always knew exactly where he was. To him, there was only one explanation: the car had been hacked. "Somebody is tracking me. You need to check it right now." The mechanic nodded, doing his best to stay serious, then walked out to the car. He tapped the center screen once, and that was all it took. The route popped up clear as day. Turns out he had accidentally turned on GPS from his phone and let it run for 3 straight days. Nobody was tracking him, except the map. And trust me, some people take paranoia to a whole different level. Story 8. A tire that was flat at the bottom and demanding a warranty claim. This guy discovered what he believed was a serious flaw in the shape of his tire. He walked into the garage with a deeply serious expression, pointed outside, and said, "My tire isn't round. You need to explain this." He went on to explain that every time he looked at the wheel, the bottom part looked flat. Not just a little low on air, but clearly below basic geometric standards. And in his mind, this had to be a manufacturing defect. Tires are supposed to be perfectly round. That's basic knowledge. The mechanic stepped outside, looked at the parked car, then looked down at the tire. He nodded slowly, like he was preparing to say something extremely obvious that was somehow still going to be difficult. "Sir, that's because the car has weight." There was a pause. He stood there, looked at the tire again, then back at the mechanic, like he was trying to renegotiate with the laws of physics. Physics, meanwhile, was still doing exactly what it does. And the next person managed to damage their own car. Story 9. Spray painting the headlights black and demanding replacements. This guy wanted his car to look cooler and ended up not being able to see anything at night. He walked into the garage looking completely certain, set his keys on the counter, and said, "My headlights have a problem. The light is unusually weak. I need them replaced." He explained that every time he drove at night, his visibility was almost non-existent. The road was dark, the signs were blurry, and to him, this was clearly a technical defect. A new car should not be like this. The mechanic nodded, pulled the car in for inspection, turned on the headlights, and immediately understood what was going on. It wasn't the bulbs, it wasn't the electrical system. The entire surface of both headlights had been covered in a smooth coat of matte black spray paint, very stylish. He turned back and asked, "Did you modify these at all?" The guy shrugged. "Yeah, I sprayed them to make them look cooler, but that doesn't mean they're supposed to get darker." There was a pause that lasted just long enough. Cool, right up until you need to see the road. And some people were convinced their car had a virus. Story 10. The car had a virus that locked the steering wheel. This woman was certain her car had been hacked. She called the garage in a rush, saying the steering wheel was completely locked and that it might be caused by a virus in the system. "I can't turn the wheel. It's completely stiff. This cannot be normal." She explained that the car was working fine the night before, but this morning she couldn't control it at all. To her, the most likely explanation was that the car had been remotely compromised. "Somebody messed with my car." The mechanic did his best to keep his voice calm and asked what exactly she was doing when it happened. She replied, "I just parked the car, turned it off, and came back this morning. And now it refuses to cooperate." He walked out, sat in the driver's seat, put his hand on the wheel, and gently turned it while turning the key. The steering wheel unlocked immediately. No virus, no hacker, just a mechanical lock. It wasn't hacking. It was physics. And the next person thought their car was bleeding. Story 11. The car was bleeding and needed an emergency inspection. This woman believed her car was losing blood. She drove straight into the garage in a panic, parked right in front of the entrance, then got out, pointed at the puddle of red fluid under the car, and said, "My car is bleeding. I need it checked right now. This is very serious." She explained that for the past few days, every time she parked, red liquid kept appearing. To her, this could not possibly be normal, and something had to be broken inside. "I don't know what it is, but I'm sure my car is badly damaged." The mechanic nodded, crouched down to inspect it, lightly touched the fluid, then stood up and looked at her with a very calm expression. "This is transmission fluid." There was a long pause. She looked down, then back at the mechanic, like she was updating her entire understanding of cars in real time. There was no blood, no wound, just a fluid leak. Cars do not have a circulatory system. But the next person was suspicious of the mechanic himself. Story 12. Black oil and accusing the shop of fraud. This guy was convinced the mechanic had scammed him. He came back to the garage just 3 days after an oil change, holding the dipstick like evidence in court, and said, "You didn't put in new oil. It's already black." He explained with complete confidence that new oil was supposed to stay clear and clean, and that the fact it had turned black so quickly could only mean the garage had poured the old oil back in. "I paid for this service. I'm not going to accept being cheated." The mechanic nodded, brought him closer, then grabbed a pen and a board like he was about to teach a very basic lesson. He explained that engine oil is supposed to clean the engine and that turning black is a sign that it is doing exactly what it's meant to do. There was a pause. The man stood there looking at the dipstick, then at the mechanic, like he had just discovered a brand new law of nature. It was dirty because it was working, and the next person didn't understand technology at all. Story 13. The hybrid kept shutting off and he wanted it fixed. "This car dies every time it stops." At least that's how this guy described it when he walked into the garage looking deeply concerned. "I just bought this car and every time I stop at a red light, the engine shuts off. That is not okay." He explained that every time the car stopped, the engine went completely quiet, then turned itself back on the moment he hit the gas again. To him, that was a clear sign of a serious defect. "I cannot believe a brand new car would have a problem like this." The mechanic nodded, pulled the car in for inspection, and needed exactly 1 minute to understand the issue. "This is a hybrid." He explained that the system is designed to shut off the engine when the car stops to save fuel, then restart it automatically when needed. There was a pause. The man stood there thinking like he was reconsidering his entire purchase. "You had just complained about the feature you specifically bought, and the next person had a problem with a smell." Story 14. The new car smell was gone and she wanted it covered under warranty. This woman walked into the garage and said in a very serious tone, "My car has seriously deteriorated after only 2 years." She set her keys on the counter like she was about to file a formal complaint, then explained that the car no longer felt premium the way it did when she first bought it. When she was asked what exactly the problem was, she let out a sigh and said, "It doesn't smell like a new car anymore." There was a short pause, the kind where you're not quite sure whether to answer or just stare for a second. She kept going very convincingly. I invested in a brand new car and part of the experience was that smell. Now it's gone, so obviously something is wrong. The mechanic nodded slowly like he was trying to decide the gentlest possible way to explain this. That is not a mechanical problem. She stood there for a few seconds processing the information like it had arrived unexpectedly. Nothing was broken. Nothing needed fixing. It wasn't a defect, it was time. And some people didn't understand the symbols on the dashboard. Story 15. The check engine light was a helicopter. This customer walked into the garage and said his car was showing a helicopter. Not as a joke either. He genuinely believed it. He pointed at the dashboard and said, "Right there, that symbol. I think there's a problem with the flight system." He explained that the symbol kept appearing and to him it looked like a tiny helicopter. So naturally he concluded the car was warning him about some kind of failure in the internal operating mechanism. I don't know the details, but it's definitely not normal. The mechanic looked at the dashboard, then back at him, doing his best to stay composed. "That's the check engine light." There was a pause. He stood there for a few seconds like he was trying to make peace with the connection between helicopter and engine. There were no blades, no flying, just a very basic warning light. If your car has a helicopter, you have much bigger problems, but at least this guy was looking at the right symbol. Story 16. The coffee warning and demanding the ads be turned off. This customer thought his car was advertising coffee. He walked into the garage looking annoyed, pointed at the screen and said, "My car keeps showing this coffee cup symbol. I didn't sign up for any ads. Turn it off." He explained that every time he drove for a while, the symbol popped up again, which he found distracting and uncomfortable. To him, this had to be some unnecessary feature, maybe even an annoying one. "I bought a car, not a billboard." The mechanic looked at the dashboard, nodded, then gently explained that it was the drowsiness warning system telling the driver to take a break after driving too long. There was a pause. He stood there for a few seconds like he was deciding whether to trust technology or keep being suspicious of it. The car wasn't selling coffee. It was trying to save your life. And some people manage to misunderstand things even more basic than that. Story 17. He thought temperature meant the gas tank was empty. This guy was absolutely sure his car was out of fuel. He called roadside assistance in a full panic, saying the car was about to die on the road even though he had filled it up not that long ago. "The needle is going up. I think it's running out." He explained that when he looked at the dashboard and saw the needle rising, he immediately concluded that the fuel level was dropping into the danger zone. No extra checking, no second thought, just action. The car got towed. Back to the garage. The mechanic walked over, looked at the dashboard, then turned back and asked gently, "What exactly are you looking at the gas gauge?" The mechanic pointed to a different spot. "This one is the gas gauge. The one you were looking at is the engine temperature." There was a long enough pause for the information to fully sink in. The engine was hot, the gas tank was not empty. And next up is someone who didn't trust how cameras work. Story 18. The backup camera had a reversed image glitch. This woman was convinced her backup camera had a serious defect. She walked into the garage looking completely certain, set her keys on the counter and said, "My car screen is completely reversed. I can't drive like this." She explained that every time she put the car in reverse, everything on the screen was backward. A car on the left showed up on the right and vice versa. To her, that made no sense at all and was obviously dangerous. "I don't understand how a modern system could get something this basic wrong." The mechanic nodded, pulled the car in for inspection, turned on the backup camera, watched it for a few seconds, then gently asked, "Do you know that a backup camera works like a mirror?" There was a pause that lasted just long enough. She looked back at the screen, then back at the mechanic, like she had just discovered a brand new rule of the universe. There was no defect at all. That's just how it's designed. If it didn't reverse the image, that's when you'd really have a problem. But the next person thought their radio was broken. Story 19. The radio lost signal and he wanted the antenna replaced. This guy was convinced his radio had broken in the middle of a trip. He walked into the garage looking irritated, saying the radio system had suddenly stopped working while he was driving. "I was listening just fine, then all of a sudden the signal disappeared. The antenna has to be the problem." He explained that he was driving from one state to another, and the moment he left the area he was familiar with, the signal vanished completely. To him, that could not possibly be a coincidence. "I need a stronger antenna." This car is clearly not good enough. The mechanic nodded and gently asked, "How far have you driven about?" "4 states." There was a pause. The mechanic exhaled softly, then explained that FM radio signals only work within a certain range and cannot follow a car across multiple states. He stood there for a few seconds like he was considering whether it was possible to negotiate with radio waves, radio signals. "Do not travel with you, even if you really like the song." And next up is someone who created the exact smell they hated. Story 20. A protein shake under the seat and demanding free cleaning. This customer was convinced the garage had caused the terrible smell in his car. He walked in looking obviously irritated. Shaking his head as he spoke, then said, "After my last service, my car started smelling awful. You need to deal with this." He explained that the smell kept getting worse, especially around midday, and in his mind that meant something had clearly been done wrong during the repair. "I don't know what you people did, but my car was never like this before." The mechanic nodded, checked the air conditioning system, checked the cabin filter, then leaned down under the passenger seat. He paused for a second. Then he pulled out a protein shake bottle, the lid still closed. But what was inside had gone far beyond the category of drink. There was a pause. The customer looked down, then quietly said, "Oh, I think that might be mine." It wasn't the garage. It was your science experiment, and some people managed to activate systems without even knowing it. Story 21. A bag of dog food triggered the seat sensor. This woman was convinced her car always thought someone was sitting beside her. She walked into the garage looking annoyed, saying the car kept making the seatbelt warning sound even though she was driving alone. "It just keeps beeping. I've tried everything. This system has to be broken." She explained that every time she drove, the warning sound came on, as if someone was sitting in the passenger seat without a seatbelt. To her, it was both annoying and completely irrational. The mechanic nodded, walked out to the car, opened the passenger door, and looked down. On the seat was a large bag of dog food sitting there neatly like a very well-behaved passenger. He turned back and looked at her. There was a pause. She followed his gaze, looked down at the bag, and then stood there like she had just realized one very important detail she had somehow missed. There was no passenger, just 15 kilos of dog food. The car wasn't wrong. It was just worried about your passenger. But the next person heard a sound that didn't even exist. Story 22. Stuff in the trunk was making the noise. This customer was absolutely certain his suspension was failing. He walked into the garage looking serious, saying the back of the car made a banging sound every time he went over a pothole. "I think the shocks are gone. It sounds terrible." He described the noise in great detail, like thunk thunk, then rolling around, and the more he explained it, the more convinced he became that this was a mechanical issue. "A new car should not sound like this." The mechanic nodded, pulled the car in for inspection, lifted it up, checked the suspension, tightened everything, and everything was perfectly fine. He paused for a second, then opened the rear trunk. Inside, a few soda cans were rolling back and forth, bumping into the sides in the exact same thunk-thunk rhythm the customer had just described. There was a pause. The customer looked inside, then back at the mechanic like he was reconsidering his entire theory. Nothing was broken. It was just the drinks moving around. And some people didn't even remove the protective layer. Story 23. New windshield wipers with the plastic still on. This woman was convinced her brand new wipers had failed immediately. She walked into the garage looking annoyed, saying she had just replaced them, and the moment it rained, they started making an awful squeaking sound. "I just changed them yesterday. There's no way they could already be bad." She described the noise very clearly and even said that every swipe felt like something was scratching the glass. To her, this had to be a defective product. The mechanic nodded, pulled the car in for inspection, turned on the wipers, listened to the sound, then leaned in for a closer look at the blade edge. He paused for a second. There was still a clear protective plastic film covering the rubber completely intact, like it had just come out of the box. He gently peeled it off. The sound disappeared. There was a pause. She looked at it, then gave a small nod like a major mystery had just been solved. It wasn't broken. It was still packaged. But the next person did something a whole lot wetter. Story 24. Opening the sunroof during a car wash. This customer was convinced his car had a serious water leak. He walked into the garage looking clearly irritated, saying the interior of the car was completely soaked after he washed it. "I just washed the car and water got inside. This has to be a design flaw." He explained that the seats, the dashboard, and even the center area of the car were all damp. To him, a modern car should never allow something like that to happen. I need the entire waterproofing system checked. The mechanic nodded, then asked one very simple question. Did you leave anything open while washing it? He answered immediately like this was perfectly normal. Yeah, I opened the sunroof. It was hot. There was a pause. The mechanic looked at him for a few seconds like he was trying to figure out whether this was a joke. It wasn't a design flaw. It wasn't the system. It wasn't the garage. It was just timing. Not bad design, just bad timing. And the next person thought their car was a lot more important than it really was. Story 25. The government was tracking his car. This customer believed his car was a target of the government. He walked into the garage looking extremely serious, lowered his voice, and spoke like he was revealing a major secret. My car is being tracked. I need you to inspect it right away. He explained that the car had too many sensors, too much location tracking, and too many electronic systems. To him, there was no way all of that existed just to help the driver. I know they're using it to track me. The mechanic nodded, doing his best to stay calm, then checked the system. Everything was working completely normally, the GPS, the sensors, the phone connection, all exactly as designed. He turned back and gently asked, Do you have location services turned on? Yes, I need it. There was a pause. There was no strange signal. No interference. Nothing at all except the features he had turned on himself. You are not that important. And some people expected their cars to do even more. Story 26. Cruise control = self-driving. This guy believed his car was supposed to steer itself. He walked into the garage looking mildly disappointed, like the vehicle had failed to live up to some very high expectations. I turned on cruise control, but the car doesn't turn by itself. That's clearly a defect. He explained that while driving on the highway, he switched on cruise control, expecting the car to handle the rest. But when he came to a curve, the car kept going straight unless he stepped in. I thought, this technology was more advanced than that. The mechanic nodded, doing his best to keep a neutral expression, then asked, What exactly do you think cruise control does? It keeps the speed and helps steer to right. There was a pause. The mechanic let out a small breath, then explained that cruise control only maintains speed. It has nothing to do with steering the car. There was no AI, no automation, just steady throttle. It's not autopilot. It's a foot replacement. And next up is a system that scares a lot of people. Story 27. ABS was working and she thought the brakes had failed. This woman was absolutely certain her brakes had completely failed. She walked into the garage looking panicked, saying that every time she hit the brakes, the whole car shook violently like it was about to fall apart. It makes noise, it shakes, and I thought the brakes were gone. She explained that it happened when it was raining. The road was slippery, and every time she braked hard, the pedal kept vibrating. To her, that was a clear sign that the system was having a serious problem. I can't drive with it feeling like that. The mechanic nodded, took the car out for a quick test on a wet stretch of road. When she hit the brakes, the vibration showed up exactly as she had described. He turned back and said, That's ABS. There was a pause. She looked down at the pedal, then back at the mechanic, like she had just realized she had misunderstood something important. It wasn't a defect. It wasn't broken. It was shaking, because it was saving you. And some people didn't even understand the pedals. Story 28. Missing the third pedal. This customer believed his car was missing a critical part. He walked into the garage looking confused, pointed down at the footwell and said, My car is missing a pedal. He explained that he had always seen 3 pedals before gas, brake, and clutch, but on this new car there were only 2. To him, this was clearly a manufacturing mistake. I don't think they would just forget something this important. The mechanic nodded, looked at the interior, then gently asked, You bought an automatic car, right? Yes, but that doesn't mean a part should be missing. There was a pause. The mechanic let out a small breath, then explained that automatic cars don't need a clutch pedal because the system handles that for you. He stood there for a few seconds like he was considering whether it was possible to renegotiate with the entire design of the automotive industry. You didn't lose anything. You chose it that way. And some people thought their car had been changed. Story 29. The car felt weak and he wanted the engine checked. This guy was convinced his car's engine had been changed. He walked into the garage looking irritated, saying the car wasn't the same anymore and that something had clearly happened. My car used to feel strong. Now it feels like someone cut the power. He explained that after the last service, the car felt noticeably slower, accelerated poorly, and no longer had the same feel it used to. To him, the most likely explanation was that the engine had been altered or that something was seriously wrong. I didn't pay for my car to drive like this. The mechanic nodded, took the car out for a test drive. A few minutes later, he came back, looked at the dashboard, then pressed one small green button. Eco mode turned off. The car immediately responded faster. There was a pause. The customer looked on like he had just realized he had accidentally made his own car weaker. Nothing had been changed. Nothing had been lost. You didn't lose power. You turned on efficiency. And finally, comes the story that made the mechanic give up. Story 30. The windshield wipers only worked when it rained and she wanted them fixed. This woman was convinced her windshield wipers were defective. She walked into the garage looking irritated, saying the system wouldn't work when she wanted it to. I turn the wipers on, but they only work when it's raining. I want them to work when I need them. She explained that in the morning when there was a little dust on the windshield, she turned the wipers on, but they didn't respond right away. To her, this was clearly a design flaw. A system like that should work whenever I turn it on. The mechanic nodded, checked it quickly, then explained that her car was set to rain sensing mode, which only activates when it detects water on the windshield. There was a pause. She looked outside where the sun was shining, then looked back at the wipers like she was trying to negotiate with the weather. There was no defect. Nothing was broken. It was working perfectly. And somehow that was the problem for her. And if you think that was the peak, just wait for the last story. Story 31. Inflating the spare tire and demanding a tire sensor repair. This guy spent 20 minutes carefully inflating a tire, just the completely wrong one. The tire pressure warning light came on and he immediately jumped into action like a responsible citizen. He pulled over, opened the trunk, saw a tire sitting neatly inside and thought, this must be it. He hooked up the pump, inflated it to 60 psi with absolute confidence. Everything looked very professional, but when he got back into the driver's seat, the warning light was still on. He started getting annoyed. I just inflated it. Why is the system still saying there's a problem? He drove to the garage demanding a sensor check because something had to be wrong. The mechanic took one look, then asked, which tire did you inflate? The one in the trunk. There was a pause. All 4 tires on the ground were still underinflated. He didn't fix the problem, but he did turn the spare tire into the healthiest one in the car. And that's when you realize, sometimes the problem isn't the car. 31 stories. And not a single one of them was actually the car's fault. The one thing that showed up in every single situation wasn't a mechanical failure. It was absolute human confidence in moments where they had no idea what was actually going on, and still believed they were completely right. And honestly, every one of us has had a moment like that. So which story made you go, there's no way? And be honest, have you ever done something like this? If you laughed, even once, hit like. Share this with that one person who always thinks they know everything. And don't forget to subscribe. If you're ready for more stories that make you laugh, and just a little bit worried about the future of humanity.